All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our June webinar with HSMAI Minnesota. I'm Stephen Dickey, the chapter president. And today we're going to get right to it with our Expedia market manager, Kelly VanDamme. It's good to see you, Kelly, again. Business has really been picking up in the Twin Cities lately, so we're excited to hear what you have to show for us today. So I'll turn it right over to you right away and just a couple housekeeping for those of you on the phone. Utilize the chat to type in some questions. We'll have time for questions at the end, I'm sure, and we'll be able to interact that way. So that was the only thing. So Kelly, we'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Stephen. And I, in advance, want to apologize. My neighbor is mowing his lawn and my dog loves to bark at the mailman who's due any minute. So I apologize in advance for those distractions. But yes, I'm Kelly VanDamme. I am the Expedia market manager for the Twin Cities area and former HSMAI co-president a couple years ago. So glad to be doing HSMAI related things again. And we are going to take a look at some traveler trends we're seeing across the country, and then some specific market trends that are happening here in the Twin Cities, and then some best practices and things you can do to take advantage of those trends. So let's see if my own page will switch. There we go. So as I said, traveler trends, market trends, and then some key takeaways. So finally, I feel like this is the most optimistic I've been on a webinar in a year and a half, definitely a year and a half. But we're seeing some signs of true improvement and hope. So we just compiled our latest traveler trend and summer forecasting data for Expedia and found that it looks like domestic air tickets are going to cost about the same as what they cost in 2019, starting in July. So seeing that airline trend is definitely huge, meaning a shift back to normal travel patterns for the leisure customer, with those rates improving to where they kind of used to be when in normal land, which is, I guess, 2019. Another big improvement, urban domestic trips are nearing their 2019 booking levels. So that is for major and kind of secondary or tertiary cities all across the United States. So that'd be us, Chicago, New York, Las Vegas, all of those are included. As probably all of you are aware, Minneapolis is on the low side of that, but it's good to see that this urban domestic trend is coming back to life. And the booking window. So the booking window is actually longer than it was in 2019 at this point. As you can imagine, there's a lot of pent up traveler demand. So people are booking further out into the future because they just can't wait to get something on the books. Even if they're not ready to travel today, they want to start planning those trips. We're also seeing trends like Vrbo is running out of rooms or houses or whatever the units happen to be for that Vrbo for summertime. And so people are starting to book into fall and early winter on Vrbo already. So lots of signs that there's going to be lots of travel happening in late summer, early fall into winter. And then of course, that is all made possible and fueled by vaccines getting going and mandates being lifted. So I know my life looks a lot more normal, and just doing everyday things kind of makes me want to cry a little bit because it feels so good to be looking and acting like a normal world again. All right, so on to traveler trends. So this is kind of what we're seeing across the board, and then I threw in some Twin Cities specific metrics in there, which I'll alert you to. So health and hygiene still really important. We're seeing that shift that I talked about in booking window. So when we last did a webinar like this, which was in March, 40% of all bookings were coming within 0 to 1 day of arrival. Now that's down to 28%. So looking very much more like a normal booking pattern, even with some of those far out booking windows that we normally didn't see too much action on in this market, are starting to show signs of life again. And then the local domestic trips. So that's been a trend for the past couple of months, but we're seeing again that tail end of things in July and August, September start to pick up for longer distances. So people are going to be coming to the Twin Cities from further away a little bit later into the summer and fall. And then mobile. So along with that change in booking window and shift, people going back to the office, sitting in front of their desktop, we're seeing a shift down from mobile for the first time ever since mobile was invented. And it's shifted to 51%, where it was at 60% in March. So just sort of a natural thing that happens depending on where people are sitting. More people are working, they book more on desktop. And then members also shifting down. So as you can imagine, somebody who's an Expedia member is more likely to travel. They're more likely to travel a lot. We're more likely to travel earlier. So there's still more member bookings than there were in the early spring, but the overall bulk of them is shifting down. So the share of mobiles, or excuse me, the share of members is declining, but the overall gross number of them is going up as all bookings are going up. But again, more casual travelers and people who may only take one trip a year or a trip not even every year are starting to book, and that kind of shifts the member down. And then package. So this is Expedia package, where a guest would book a hotel and a car rental or airfare together in one bundled rate. And that is almost back to its normal share at 8%. So 9% is usually about normal for this market. So almost there, and showing again that improvement from Q1. This was already doing better in March. So there wasn't so much room to improve. But if you notice in all of these metrics that I talk about quite a bit whenever you have a call with me, package is consistently showing improvement, where everything's kind of shifting around a little bit more back to normal patterns. Package continues to climb. And then as far as what's happening, that's sort of a new trend that we weren't seeing earlier or weren't seeing pre-COVID times, but 4-stars are seeing a lot of share shift to them, especially for international travelers, which I know you're saying, we don't have any international travelers, what are you talking about? But folks for international are actually booking into the fall periods with kind of hopes that things will work out for international travel at that time. So we're actually seeing the month of November has like a 10% international share. I think it's that George Strait concert. Apparently Canadians must love George Strait, because we're definitely seeing a direct impact for November already. And then amenities. So travelers are much more interested in pools and spas and restaurants, things that are amenity driven, and 4-stars and up usually have more of those type of offerings than like a 2-star would. So that's one of the reasons why 4-stars is starting to shift share to them. Also couples. So we're seeing a lot of couples. The number of couples is actually increased from 2019 on Expedia. And then we're actually seeing a shift up for families on Vrbo. So kind of a balancing act where families are still preferring that kind of house unit, multiple room, where couples are starting to see more and more hotel type bookings. So along with this, there's kind of a trend where leisure is really going to be king this summer. Not that it's not always a huge part of our market, but without that pickup in convention and the pickup from business travelers, which is coming, but much more slowly, being laser focused on what leisure customers want is really important. So if you look at your photos and notice you have a lot of pictures of banquet rooms and your computer center and things like that, maybe there's a chance to replace some of those photos or shift them around so that the things like the pool in your restaurants, or if you have a spa, so those pictures are being focused. There are some hotels in town that don't even have a picture of their pool. That's the #1 thing people are looking for right now, is a pool. So make sure that that stuff is being front and center pictured. You might be saying, well, I'm not a 4-star. I can't necessarily just build on a spa to my hotel. What should I do? Well, most hotels have suites, and people are really looking for an experience rather than just a place to stay. So if you utilize your suites, try and upsell them as much as possible, you'll track in some of those types of folks that are looking for that 4-star experience, even if you're not a 4-star. And I know it's really tough right now. Suites are a lot harder to clean. So if you're focusing on increasing the length of stay for those suites, you'll really reap the benefits of getting the customer the product they want without completely throwing your housekeeping askew by over-indexing on on suites. All right, and then specific to us is what's coming up next. So I went to the Meet Minneapolis website, which has this phenomenal information in it about hotel occupancy rates. So I put the link at the bottom, and I'll include that in the information on the HSMAI website when we're done. But if you don't or haven't ever accessed this link, it's phenomenal. Like, I didn't know it was there until a couple days ago, and it's really great information. But what that's telling us is all information from STR about hotel occupancy. There's also information in there about air lift, the number of people going back to offices to work in downtown. Lots of really interesting facts, but I stole the hotel ones. So this is looking at April. May hasn't come out yet. So April, we were still one of the lowest occupancies in the country as far as major markets go. Us in Boston, we're about tied for the bottom of the top. I think they do the top 40 major markets at 42.5% occupancy. So the good news is that was up significantly from the month before. But down 25% of where we were in 2019. So if you look at the kind of the line graph over on the right, you can see that green line is this year and the blue line is 2019. So I'm just not going to talk about 2020 at all. We'll just ignore it. But you can see the pattern is like they're going up at closely the same speed, which really speaks to like seasonality. But it's hard to tell in this graph, but we are actually closing the gap ever so slowly. And I'm fairly confident when we see the results for May, it's going to be much, much closer to those 2019 numbers. Not all the way there, but much, much closer. So I'm really excited for that data to come out so we can kind of see some of that more hopeful feeling reported in these graphs. So same website again, broken down into the 3 major submarkets. So up top is Bloomington, middle is Minneapolis, and then the bottom is St. Paul. So, and this goes along with the trends I've been talking about for months now, where Bloomington has really seen a much faster pace of recovery. They're already up into like the 50% or 50% occupancy range, where downtown Minneapolis is about like 22. So significantly higher in Bloomington. But as I talked to you guys in Bloomington, you're starting to fill up, especially on weekends, starting to raise rates, and downtown is becoming a much more wanted place to be. So people are shifting away from Bloomington into the rest of the Twin Cities area. And again, I think those May numbers are going to look significantly better than this. And then June, especially for downtown, is going to look much, much improved. All right, so then specific to Expedia, these are what the submarkets are sort of doing for bookings basically in May. So Bloomington East, which is the Mall of America airportish area, is seeing about 24% of all of our bookings are going to them with an ADR of 114. Downtown Minneapolis is dead even with that, but a significantly higher ADR. So that's sort of the way Bloomington and downtown always go for ADR. Granted, they're both usually much higher, but Bloomington is traditionally significantly less than downtown Minneapolis. Normally, if I add Bloomington East and Bloomington West together, it adds up to what downtown Minneapolis produces. So that really speaks to that over-indexing of what Bloomington East has been doing as far as its pace of recovery and kind of shifting a lot of share to that part of the market. Everything else is fairly stable as far as the order of things are going. Roseville has jumped up quite a bit. I talk about Roseville every time just because they've been doing so like well throughout this. When everyone else seems to have really negative numbers, they only had slightly negative numbers. So that's popped up a few in placement. And then this is just a quick, I know this graph is really busy and I tried to figure out a way to redo it, but I just kept it the way it is for the sake of ease. But this breaks down the submarkets according to their year-over-year growth in both room nights and in ADR. So the yellow part is package, and then the blue part is sort of our non-package booking, so sort of everything else. So you can see the package percentages on the bottom part. So we'll talk about those first. Traditionally, this is the way it's always been. Downtown Minneapolis gets a lot more package bookings than the rest of the market. It's sort of odd because usually it's an airport area that would get the most of these bookings, but in our market, it's always been downtown Minneapolis. So the package share hasn't changed since pre-COVID. But if we focus really on the blue parts, we can see in this kind of May timeframe that downtown Minneapolis has really saw a ton of improvement. So they're up 236% over where they were in 2019. So not saying that's where they want to be or need to be, but it is by far the fastest pace of recovery that we've seen for the month of May. So Bloomington East and Bloomington West are kind of in the middle, and then North Minneapolis, for obvious reasons, had a rough time period in there. You can see the ADR is sort of the inverse of that. So the ADR for downtown Minneapolis is only up 9%, where Bloomington East is up 36%. So that again speaks to that trend of Bloomington is starting to fill up on weekends, starting to raise rates, starting to shift people out of Bloomington into the rest of the Twin Cities. So downtown Minneapolis has always had a significantly higher ADR than Bloomington. So seeing it not improve as much is not a sign that their ADR is too low or not moving at the right pace. It's just kind of a reconciliation of where their normal ADRs are. So Bloomington East always was low, downtown Minneapolis always was high, and they're just a little closer together than they usually were. All right, and then by day of week. So I always find this really interesting. And this looks fairly similar to what it looked like in March. Sorry, and I didn't update the date at the bottom, but this is the new information. So Fridays and Saturdays, obviously no surprise to anyone, are doing well, or the best. Specifically Saturdays. What I always like to point out about this is Sunday. So the blue line is the ADRs for those specific day of the week, and the green line is the room night share. So, and Sunday has a fairly low part of share. It's only at 12%. Much like Thursday is at 14. So if we're trying to build out weekends and create a longer length of stay, Sunday and Thursday have relatively close to the same opportunity. But if we look at ADR, it looks like there's just a big tendency in this market to drive ADR on Sunday, but not on Thursday. And so I believe if ADRs were a little shifted around, we could balloon out the length of stay to include a lot of Sunday night stays. So keep in mind, we're talking about leisure guests, and the total cost of the stay is very, very important to a leisure guest. So if they can get a great deal on a 3-night stay versus a pretty okay deal on a 2-night stay, they'll make the shift to a 3-night stay. Like, they have a lot more freedom than a business traveler or a convention traveler does to make those decisions just on the fly. All right, and then this is a very busy graph again, but the most important metric really in here is the one in the top left corner. So 95% of overall room nights are being booked on non-refundable rate plans. So this has actually gone up since March. So in my head, I thought this was going to go down and look a little bit more like pre-COVID days, but it actually went up. And once I thought about all the other things that I had just talked about, it made sense. If you were seeing a lot more bookings for August and September, those folks are much less likely, especially in today's world, to book a non-refundable rate plan. So as we shift out that booking window, having refundable rates is even more important to the customer than it was before. So you can see especially the distant, like 2022 area, that's almost 100% refundable rates. And we only get into kind of a significant share of non-refundable rates when we get into the immediate month that we're already in. So keep that in mind if you're thinking about kind of changing back to a non-refundable strategy. It's not going to work for future business quite yet. All right, so what's happening in the future? So this is a look at our year-over-year trends for the future months. So you can see we've got some great growth coming in August, September, and October. Again, just mimicking what I've been about the whole time. And then the blue line is ADR growth year over year. So we're seeing like a constant improvement in that. November is an anomaly again because of that George Strait concert. November generally is not our strongest month, but there's that one day that's doing really well. So that's why ADR looks so skewed high, is because that one day has very high ADRs and that's the only day booking. So keep that in mind. So we're seeing just that constant drive in ADR and constant improvement year over year as people are booking into that summer and fall time period. All right, and then specifically by dates. So this is a report that is in Expedia Partner Central and available to you guys at any time for your specific market and submarket. And it is looking at search dates over time. So on the far left is back in March, how many searches and how many bookings we were getting, moving forward through time to now, regardless of stay date. So our kind of hope would that we'd see both of the dark lines moving constantly up. And then the lighter lines are kind of benchmark of where 2019 was. So they are very slowly moving up, with the exception of this blip for spring break. We saw a lot of people booking in that spring break time period that we weren't, and then we saw a little bit of a drop through April, and now we're starting to see more of that pickup. So as this report generates for the next couple of weeks, I think it'll be very clear that that trend is actually moving up. It's just a little kind of not as obvious because of that blip up for spring break. All right, and then specific dates. Last time we talked, I had this up. Since then, the two main things we had going on in July have canceled and moved to dates further out. So Motley Crue and George Strait are both now much further into the future and not happening this summer. So I do expect State Fair to look good, but everything else is kind of a crapshoot at this point. And another reason to really keep things refundable, keep things open, don't drive ADR too crazy, because any event that we have for the summer is still in jeopardy, as we've seen with these just constantly kind of the near-term concerts. We seem to just keep getting a lot of cancellations and rebookings. All right, and this is again available to you at any time, but this is a current look at the demand and bookings by stay date. So you can see, like in normal times, I'll shift back so you can see what it looked like when we had those blips up for kind of spikes in demand and bookings. They have disappeared now. So they are no longer there. We no longer have those kind of big blips up. So what I did is pull a different graph that's a little easier to see very specific dates that might be jumping up, and kind of give you some more information just in not a pretty graph form. But I did notice that 4th of July weekend looks really light. It looks just significantly less pickup than the rest of bookings. Obviously with that Motley Crue concert canceling, and then the 4th just has never been a big weekend for us. Most people, go to the lake. They don't necessarily come to the Twin Cities. That makes total sense that happened, but just keep your eye out on that. If you were seeing a lot of demand, it was probably due to that concert that's no longer there. And then August 14th, for whatever reason, is another big blip down. I don't think there's a really strong reason for that, other than there's just nothing happening that weekend, where there might be a few things happening on the other weekends. And then, shocking to no one, but all the dates to watch are Vikings games and that George Strait concert I've mentioned 17 times already. So keep in mind, like the Vikings games are looking good as we have any dates in the past year. They might not be looking good as they always have, but there's still a lot of promise in those games. And then we got some new tools. So we've had this tool for a while, but it's called Rev Plus, and we've kind of made a bunch of updates to it and made it accessible to all hotels recently. So I wanted to just really quickly give you a snapshot of what it does, because I kind of think it's amazing and really like it. So it's available in this revenue management tab in Expedia Partner Central. And there's a couple key things to look at. So there's a ton of stuff in here. I'm just going to give you the big cliff notes, but it has these, check these dates. These are where we're seeing search demand pick up. So not necessarily even booking demand, but search demand. So it's one step ahead of the booking process, kind of the earliest glimpse you can get of what travelers are going to do. And hopefully you can adjust strategies before the bookings are made. Then we have this button up here that lets you customize Direct Plus. There's a lot of good stuff in there. I don't have time to go through, but check it out when you get a chance. And then if you scroll down on that same screen, it brings you to a calendar view that just shows your rate versus your comp sets rate, and kind of really clearly points out any problems or issues that you might want to check. Those yellow dots mean there's no inventory loaded for this hotel in the next few days. This particular hotel is not open yet, so that's not a problem for them. But then the magic for me really happens when you go on this calendar view and click a specific date. It brings you to this screen with just a ton of detail about what's happening on that specific date. So again, your rate versus your competitor's rate, what your members' rate is doing on that day versus your competitors. And then again, that really, really specific search data. So this is for a hotel in downtown that, and this is for a Vikings game date. So their rate is $50 under where the comp set is set at. And we're seeing the submarket has a 246% growth over where we were for the same date in 2019. So this is a really strong date, but their rates are not reflecting that. So this is a huge like flag saying, hey, we should probably take a look at this this date. And one of the few times lately I've gotten to say, maybe you should raise rate for that date, which feels really good to be able to say that in any instance. So check it out, tons and tons of really good information in there. All right, and I talked a lot about football, so I wanted to remind you guys, if you either weren't here in 2018 or maybe need a refresher, about the study I did way back then about NFL trends. So I pulled every game for many, many years and for the entire country and tried to figure out the trends caused by NFL schedules. And this is sort of the cliff notes of what I found. But Monday for the Twin Cities drove, if a game's on a Monday, it drove up room night production by 65% and ADR by 22%. Oops, sorry. Thursday games had the biggest improvement, huge growth in room nights and ADR. Sundays, so if the game is on a Sunday, what happens to the Saturday beforehand? This is the growth. And then Sunday game day, what the growth is. So Thursdays and Mondays had the biggest effect because they normally don't have the most leisure business. Weekends usually have leisure business, so they only saw a small improvement, but overall they have the most bookings and the highest ADR. So then the one thing I found in this study that really mattered for Sundays, which again, I think is one of the major things we're missing and can really drive some occupancy on Sundays, is what time the game is. So if the game is early in the morning on a Sunday, we saw a 22% rise for the Twin Cities in bookings for that Sunday night. If the game is in the afternoon, that goes up to 25%. And then as you can imagine, if the game's later at night on a Sunday, we see the most amount of bookings. So not only do you have to pay attention to it being a game day, you also have to pay attention to what time that specific game is to try and see how your Sunday is going to perform from that game day. And then I believe this still holds true. But what kind of opportunity were we missing for the Twin Cities when I pulled this? And even for nationwide, but especially for us, when we had a Vikings game on a Sunday, we actually saw a length of stay decrease for the Saturday before it. So that means Vikings game weekends, people are more likely to only stay one night on a Saturday night before the game is the most common. So if we change our strategies to really maximize game weekends to try and drive a 2-night length of stay, that would really pay dividends for us. We've got a huge audience of people to attract. And if we try and focus them in to stay a little longer, I think we can do that by optimizing promotional strategies to really aim people at a 2-night stay or 3-night stay even. All right, so that's what I've got for you, and we're right at time. So just really quickly, look at Expedia Partner Central reporting. Expedia packages, if they're not optimized for your hotel, take a look at those. Flexible cancellation policies are still very real and very needed. And then drive up that length of stay for Vikings games, and just basically constantly, it'll help with your housekeeping woes, it'll help with your occupancy levels. It's just kind of the name of the game right now. So again, this was the slide I had in March, and I crossed that out, and it's happening. We're coming back. So I have time after this if anybody has any questions, but I totally understand if you guys have to drop off. Anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Kelly. We don't have any questions in the chat that I can see, but if anyone feels they want to take themselves on mute, we could take a couple seconds to see if you have any questions for her.
All right, well, I will also put my contact information in the kind of recap of this that'll be on the HSMAI website. So I'm always happy to chat through for specific hotels, or if you're in the St. Paul area, Michelle is happy to chat with you about your specific hotel as well.
Awesome, thank you. Yes, we'll post this video and this deck on the HSMAI Minnesota website and the YouTube page. Always great information, Kelly. Really exciting to talk about football season again, and actually having some demand for football season coming up. But for upcoming HSMAI webinars, we actually have one next week with Tammy Gillis. She's a sales consulting professional that's going to walk us through some sales strategies for the recovery. So we're excited to have another one coming up next week. So if you're on today, go in and register for next week and save the meeting invite to your calendar, and we'll talk to you then. We also got some exciting events coming up in the summer, and then obviously in the fall we'll have our normal in-person events for HSMAI. We had an in-person event in last month that was really exciting to get kicked back off with those. And we'll have more coming up in the fall. So please watch the HSMAI Minnesota website, the LinkedIn page and the Facebook page for updates, for more opportunities to engage with us and learn and network eventually. So looking forward to seeing all of you soon at our next event. And I will see you all soon. Thank you, Kelly, again.
Thank
Bye,
you
everyone.
for having me, Stephen.